Hey guys, what's up? This is Mr. Bale from CHMS. I'm going to walk you guys through some options, things that we can do at home, even though we don't have access to our normal programs we would use. We normally would be using Photoshop. Um, this is going to allow us to continue the things we've been working on, even though we don't have access to Photoshop. So the program we're going to be using is actually super cool. It runs in your web browser, so you can run this inside a um, Google Chrome, or I believe even within um, literally any other browser, but I'm going to be using Google Chrome. So the site, or the app, if you want to call it that, is called Pixlr, Pixlr. Okay, so if you just literally Google Pixlr, it'll be the very first thing that comes up. When you click on it, it's a little bit confusing at first. It looks like this. This doesn't really do you any good. But when you scroll down here, it's going to give you the option to open the program right away. Excuse me, where is it? Okay, I guess I click right here, start editing. Actually, that's not what I want. Sorry. What I want up here, you'll notice there's a Pixlr X and there's a Pixlr E. Pixlr E is the thing that I want. That's the more advanced program. So over here, you make sure it says Pixlr E. I'm just going to click Create New. The size that I'm going to create right now is this Full HD 1920 by 1080. I'm just going to click Create. I'm going to give it a white background over here. So I just turn on background and click white, and that's going to give me a nice plain white background. So this is going to look really familiar to you because this has a lot of similarities to Photoshop. It works really similarly. A lot of the tools are similar. So you have things like your move tool. They have different names in Pixlr, but basically everything is going to work the same. So you'll find a brush, lasso, selection tool, marquee selection tool, and some other things. So today we're going to mostly be using layers, which are over here. They work just like Photoshop layers, works exactly the same way. We're also going to be using the gradient tool, which is right over here, and the marquee selection tool, which is right here. So I'm starting out with a plain, empty white background. No big deal. I'm going to first make a new layer, just like we would in Photoshop, and I'm going to create an empty layer like so. Okay. So my first layer, all I'm going to do is create a background. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. This is the zoom tool down here at the bottom. Looks like a magnifying glass. If you click, it zooms in. If you hold shift and click, it'll zoom out. I like to be zoomed out a little bit so I can see my whole picture. You do whatever you got to do. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use my marquee selection tool, this guy right here, and I'm going to basically select the bottom half of the picture. Didn't work the first time. Let's try that again. I'm going to select the bottom half of the picture about like so. This is going to be the ground in my illustration here. So I am on layer 1 and I have the bottom half of the picture selected. Okay, so I'm going to now use the gradient tool, which is right over here. Gradient tool works just like it works in Photoshop. So if you're familiar with it in Photoshop, this is going to be really simple. Up here at the top, it shows me it's going to make a linear gradient, which means it fades from one color to another in a straight line. The other option is radial, which does it in a circular pattern. I'm going to do linear right now. It's going to use the two colors that I have selected down here, which is white and black. I can also click on this gradient right here and change the colors if I want, or use some presets if I want to. For right now, I'm just going to do a linear gradient that goes from white to black. Okay, going to zoom out just a little bit. Okay, so here is my selection. So that selection there means that my gradient is only going to go inside that area. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to click. Whoops, that was weird. Let's try that again, shall we? Sorry about that. Okay, so that's the gradient it made. Definitely not what I want. this is a good point for me to point out the undo function. So over here is history. I can go back through each of my steps if I want to. I can also just hit Command or Control Z, and that will undo my last step. So your shortcuts from Photoshop pretty much translate directly to Pixlr, which is pretty awesome. All right, so I'm gonna use the gradient tool. So I'm gonna click and drag. So where I first click is where my first color will show up. Where I let go is where my second color will show up. In this case, I'm gonna go from white at the top to a darker shade down there at the bottom, just like that. Easy peasy. If I'm not crazy about my colors, I can come up here. I'm not real thrilled with this black color down here. I'm gonna go a little bit lighter. So I'm gonna choose a slightly different color here. Just gonna go a little bit lighter like that, so it doesn't look too dark. Try that again, right on top of the other one. That's better. That's what I want. So now I'm going to make another selection, and this time I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to go from the top into the middle of the picture, and I'm going to do a gradient in just the opposite direction. So white at the bottom and darker at the top. A little bit higher, like so. Okay. To get rid of my selection, all I have to do is grab my Marquee tool here and just click anywhere on the picture and it'll go away. So what I have here now is kind of an empty, sort of surreal looking landscape where it looks like it goes off into the distance with a sky at the top and ground at the bottom. Okay, pretty simple. So that I have on my background layer. The layer above that, I'm going to draw a sphere, okay, or a ball. This is something you've seen me do before in class. It's a really simple technique, but really works really effectively with Photoshop, or in this case with Pixlr. So I'm going to draw a circle right here. I'm going to make sure it's on a new layer. Okay. If I do not have a new layer, all you got to do is click this little plus button over here on my layers, and it'll create a new layer. So previously I was making a rectangle selection. At this point, I want to make an ellipse or a circular selection, which is right up here. So I want to make sure that I have just simply chosen the ellipse option instead of the rectangle option up here at the top. Okay. So I'm going to make a circle. You'll notice that when you first start drawing an ellipse in Pixlr, it'll make any shape. So it might be an oval, it might be a circle. If you hold the Shift key, it'll make sure that it only makes a perfect circle. You know, way more perfect than you could draw it yourself if you tried to draw a perfect circle. So there is my circular selection. Hasn't actually changed the picture yet, but it's just a selection. If I don't like where it is, I can click and drag to move it around elsewhere in the picture. Basically what I want is I want this to look like it's a ball kind of sitting on the ground here. And then I'm going to do a couple of other ones smaller in the distance. So here is my gradient tool again. Okay, I want to make sure that I am on layer 1, not on the background, but I'm on layer 1. And then I'm going to set this to the radial setting. So a linear gradient would look like this. Basically, it goes in a straight line from white to black. Okay, and that looks okay. But when I'm trying to make a ball, it works a lot better if I use a radial. And what this does is it allows me to create an area where it looks like there's a highlight and a shadow, just like that. So, I mean, this literally took me just literally one click, and I can create a pretty realistic looking sphere in that landscape. So now I have a ball, okay? I'm going to now make another layer. I'm going to make it an empty layer, so there's nothing on it. I want it to be under the ball layer. So here's the ball, and this is going to be the shadow. So now I'm going to use the Marquee selection again. I'm going to draw out, this time, an oval shape, not a circle, but an oval shape, like so. Okay, notice that because I'm now on layer 2, it's going to be under the ball. So it's going to look like the ball is actually casting a shadow. I'm going to use the gradient tool again and draw out my shadow. Something is going to look weird though, so I'm just going to point that out right now. So here's my shadow. Now, what you'll notice this looks a little bit funky. Okay, it has a white part over here and a black part over here. Doesn't look like a very good shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. I can just go back on my history here, or I can press Command or Control Z. So I'm going to adjust my gradient up here before I draw it here a little bit. Instead of going white into black, this is a little bit weird, but what I want to actually do is I want to go black into black. What? Yeah, black into black, except this side, I'm going to put the opacity right here to 0%. So what that's going to do, it's going to give me a gradient that fades from a clear, transparent to a dark black. Okay? Now when I draw that gradient, watch what happens. It goes from transparent to black. Okay? But in the case of a shadow, the shadow should actually be darkest right under the object. So now I have a nice dark black shadow that fades out as it goes off to the right. Okay. Now, just a quick little bit of information. If you are not happy with the positioning of the objects, you can move them around. Okay. Pixlr calls it the Arrange tool. It's up here at the top. Looks like the arrow tool or the move tool in Photoshop, exactly the same. It works on each layer separately. So I can move these layers around to get just the look that I want from my shadow. So I want the shadow to be right there, and I want the ball to be right there. If I want to look like the ball is floating, I could put the ball like above the shadow. In this case, I want the ball to just be right on the shadow like so. So that's pretty effective. It looks like this ball is actually casting a shadow onto the ground. I'm going to do a couple more. So I'm just going to make a new layer, empty layer. I'm going to use my Marquee selection again. I'm going to draw another circle a little bit farther back here in the distance, so it looks like it's kind of retreating into the distance back there. Use my radial white into black. Okay, and there is my ball. Now you'll notice this time I'm trying to avoid getting the dark black on there. I want it to look like this ball is kind of like off in the distance. So I'm going to extend my gradient out a little bit more. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see that. So that as I'm going into the distance, the spheres that I'm drawing farther away have less contrast. So it looks a little bit more like it's a little bit faded out. Okay. New layer again. Empty layer. We put it under the ball, and same deal with the marquee. Draw out a selection where the shadow is going to go. Grab my gradient tool, switch it to black and black instead of black and white. Turn the opacity to 0. Okay. And now I can create another shadow that goes from transparent to black. Now, I don't want it to actually be black because, again, I want to try and create a little bit of a lower contrast back there. So I want my shadow just to be kind of a darker gray, but not all the way to black. There you go. So now it really looks like that ball is farther off in the distance. I'm going to do one more. Empty. I'm going to put this one really far away. Way back here on the very edge of the horizon, way over there. Okay, I'm going to zoom in nice and close so we can really see what I'm doing here. Way over there. Gradient tool, black and white, radial, like so. In this case, I want very little of the black, so the color is a lot lighter on this one. Again, another new layer. Okay, and this one is the shadow for the farthest away sphere. Draw out my selection like so. Grab my gradient, radial, again, make sure it's using black and black, opacity 0%. And there you have it. Let's do that a little bit better. little bit too dark, right? Let's go back. Remember, you can always hit Command Z or Control Z to undo if you don't like something. Okay, so there we go. All right, now when I zoom out, you'll see the entire image. I now have 3 spheres going off into the distance. I now realize this one looks a little bit funky. So that one is here on layer 3 and layer 4. I'm going to go ahead and select that layer. I'm going to move this guy down and over a little bit and move his shadow as well to the same spot. Okay, so now I've got 3 spheres going back into the distance, shrinking and fading out as they get farther away. So it really looks like they are fading into the distance. I can now save this. I can go up to File and Save, just like I would in Photoshop. Okay, I want to give it a file name. I'm going to call this Sphere Landscape. Okay, I'm going to click download because I'm actually not saving it online. I'm downloading it to my local computer. I'm going to click download, and there it is. Now this I should be able to submit on Canvas or Google Classroom if you're at HMS. But at CHMS, we'll be using Canvas, and I'll be submitting that file up to Canvas. That's it. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Send me a message if you get confused. Bye.